who want to complete Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. So we come towards the end of this great month. The likelihood is that at Maghrib, which is in the second of these Rabi'at, of these spring months, these months in which parts of go back to life by virtue of a further connection to the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the source of all life. And it's important, alhamdulillah, by the blessings and the benedictions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, benefaction that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted us tawfiq to engage the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this month, this blessed month, learning so much about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by virtue of the great Shaykh and Hafiz of Sham, Halab radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa Shaykh Abdallah Sirajuddin rahimahullah ta'ala, his monumental work, Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad the Messenger of God, intent to becoming a peaceful of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, man khalatahu ma'rifatan ahabba. And Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhahu, he says that when intermingled with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, out of what knowledge of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, would love the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And the experience of Abdallah is a testimony to the veracity of Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajhahu wa radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardah. نتشبه إن لم تكن مثلهم فإن نتشبه بالكرام فلاحهم. So thereby we imitate, even though we're not of them, because the imitation of the people of success is also a type of success. We reach the end of the work, rahimahullah ta'ala, which we read over the last 2 years. The first half that we read last time we over, and the second we now conclude, inshallah ta'ala, today's gathering of the work of the Imam, rahimahullah ta'ala, the last of the greats of the Ummah of the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, the likes of whom the Ummah will never see again. As we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to place us inside of His barakah, and likewise for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to feed Allah ta'ala's overflow. Unto the great Shaykh radiallahu anhu wa ardahu, lahu ahlu, that which he truly deserves, for his servitude to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, and the Ummah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He's going to conclude his work, rahimahullah ta'ala, with the chapter, إبارة القدر الشريف الأسرار والأنوار والخيرات والبركات على صاحبه أفضل الصلوات والتسليمات. In it, he titles it the secrets, the illuminations, the blessings. A calamity that shook the entire existence to its core. So the Prophet ﷺ informs us in his hadith that he voted Arsh al-Rahman, that the throne of the Rahman of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shuddered upon the death of Sayyid Sa'id ibn Mu'adh, rahimahullah ta'ala. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And what then do you believe happened when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself died? So that is the supreme calamity of the Ummah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's the supreme calamity of the entire cosmos that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took unto himself his beloved sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, such that as it was in the beginning, it thereby came to pass. In the section of his Sunan collection entitled The Blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon his Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam after his death, Imam al-Darimi rahimahullah ta'ala narrates that Abu al-Jawza Aus ibn Abdallah radiallahu ta'ala anhu ardahu said that the people of Medina suffered a dreadful drought. So they complained of it to Sayyidat Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha wa ardaha, who said, go to the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam and open above it a window to the heavens so that there is no ceiling between it and the sky. It's in Aisha radiallahu anha wa ardaha is teaching the people higher belief, higher faith. In that now they're in a time of drought and they come to Sayyidat Aisha radiallahu anha wa ardaha and they're seeking rain from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Aisha. But Sayyidat Aisha radiallahu anha wa ardaha, she points them to that which is higher. And where does Aisha live? She lives in the house, the very house in which the Prophet ﷺ passed away. She's living in the very house in which the Prophet ﷺ is buried, radiallahu ta'ala anha wardaha. And so when they come out to say to Aisha, radiallahu anha wardaha, Aisha, why are you asking me when there is the Prophet ﷺ? And so thereby she shows them a coup, as she's going to say, radiallahu anha, and wardaha, open up in the roof of the house an aperture, such that the grave of the Prophet ﷺ is exposed towards the heavens. It's exposed towards the sky. So there's no ceiling barrier between the grave of the Prophet ﷺ and the heavens and the sky. And so thereby they did, as Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha wardaha said, and immediately, without hesitation, we were given abundant rain. So that grass grew, and the camels so became fat that their skins split because of the fat, and thereafter the year was known as the year of splitting. That way the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, who himself says, Hayati khayrun lakum wa mamati khayrun lakum, that my life is good for you, but likewise also my death is good for you. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and his death is but higher life for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and all of those who are in the good company of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in that life al-barzakhi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Another example of this was when the call to prayer was heard from the blessed grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Darimi also narrated in the same chapter that Sa'id ibn Abdullah said during the events of Harra, the call to prayer was not sounded in the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for 3 days, nor was the iqamah. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib did not leave the mosque throughout that time, and he would only know the time of prayer had come in by a humming sound that he heard from the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Ibn Najjar also narrated it with the wording that the call to prayer was not sounded during the events of Harra for 3 days, and all the people went out save Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who remained inside of the mosque. And Sa'id said, when the time for midday prayer, Dhuhr, came in, I heard the adhan issuing from the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and so I offered 2 cycles of prayer. Then I heard the iqamah, and so I offered the midday prayer. The adhan and the iqamah continued to be sounded from the holy grave of the Prophet ﷺ for each and every single prayer until the 3 nights of Harra had passed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted Sa'id ibn Musayyib a great honor by allowing him to hear this and to take comfort from this. This is the Harra of the most dire period in the history of the Ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, when the forces of Banu Umayyah, of the Umayyads, who were emerged out of Damascus, they invade Medina al-Munawwara, and they desecrate the holy land of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, a land in which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was buried, a land upon which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam walked, a land upon which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam talked, a land upon which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam slept, a land upon which he woke sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And we heard the reverence to the likes of the Shuyukh radiallahu anhu wardahum of that same generation of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib rahimahullah ta'ala, the likes of Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir rahimahullah ta'ala, that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala would find him rolling, quote unquote, in the earth of Medina al-Munawwara. And we would ask Sayyidina Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir as to why. He said, the land upon which the feet of the Prophet ﷺ tread. That Medina al-Munawwara. Of the dark times with Banu Umayyah, the Umayyads invade Medina al-Munawwara and desecrate it and kill a great number of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as the Tabi'een, the students of the companions of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, to the point that they bring their beasts into the very mosque of the Prophet ﷺ and desecrate the masjid of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They kill, they take life, the supreme haram, the haram of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the haram of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, seemingly sparing no life. And when there's one individual who refuses to leave the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, a voice sounds out, leave that one alone. He said, why do we leave that one alone? He said, huwa majnoon, he's mad. Remember the Imam of that same generation, radiallahu anhu, wardahu, Sayyidina Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, Ra'aytu unas, law ra'aytum la hasibatum majanin. That I saw people, had you seen them, you consider them to be mad, he said. Brother, the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, and there are those, mashallah ta'ala, kamil. They're perfect in their inheritance from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, like this man who they term mad. His name Sa'id ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah ta'ala, khiyar tabi'een, of the greatest of the students of the companions, radiallahu anhu warda, a'lam tabi'een, bila munaza'a, the most knowledgeable of all of that second generation, radiallahu anhu warda. And that's saying something that in those formative generations, that the Prophet attributed khairiyya, khairun nas qarni, thumma ladina alunahum, thumma ladina alunahum in the Bukhari, the best generation is my generation, then those who follow them, then those who follow them, those first 3 generations. For it to be said that you're the most knowledgeable man of that generation, that is saying something. And that most knowledgeable man led the most knowledgeable men in prayer. From amongst who were the companions themselves. He said, for 40 years, I never saw the neck of any man inside of the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, the great Imam, Sayyidina Sa'id ibn Musayyib, al-Makhzumi, radiallahu ta'ala, anhu warda. And so they let him be. And they locked the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ for 3 days, 3 entire days. Locked down the mosque of the Rasul ﷺ. There's not a single soul that prays inside of the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ except one man who remains inside the masjid, locked therein. No food, no water, dhikrullah wa dhikru Rasulillah. Faqat, radiallahu anhu warda, dhaka Sa'id ibn Musayyib, that's the Imam, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah ta'ala. After 3 days, he emerges, radiallahu anhu wardahum, and the first thing they want to know, as-salah, as-salah, which is one of the last public words of the Prophet ﷺ, as-salah, as-salah, prayer, prayer, the last public words of the Prophet ﷺ. That's what they want to know about Sayyidina Sa'id, rahimahullah ta'ala. Like, you prayed? How then did you pray? Inside the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, where you had no quote-unquote empirical means of determining when Dhuhr enters, when Asr enters, when Maghrib enters, when Isha enters. Kayfa ya Sa'id? And Sa'id al-Musayyib simply says, the Rasul called adhan for me. The Rasul, from the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's alive inside of his grave, he's calling the adhan for that great Imam, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. We don't even find that the Rasul ﷺ, in his lifetime upon earth, calls the adhan. Not once does he call the adhan, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But we hear the Rasul from his Barzakh al-Sharif calling the adhan for the great Imam, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, yani rahimahullah ta'ala. Hakada, so we understand something about the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, wa ahlun Nabi, and the people of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, such as the Imam in question, radiallahu ta'ala anhu wardahu, the adhan and the iqama. In this tradition here, in this variant, continue to be sounded from the holy grave of the Prophet ﷺ for each and every single prayer until 3 nights had transpired. Allah granted Sa'id ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah ta'ala, a great honor by allowing him to hear this and to take comfort from this, radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardahu. Ibn al-Bayhaqi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Abu Ya'la al-Bazzar, and Ibn Uday narrated, and al-Bayhaqi declared it to be rigorously authentic, sahih, on the authority of Sayyidina Anas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, the prophets are alive in their graves praying. الأنبياء أحياء في قبورهم يصلون. Sayyidina Anas, rahimahullah ta'ala, says on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ, who's getting a glimpse of it in Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, when the Prophet ﷺ Kathib al-Ahmar at the red sand dunes of Arabia, when he gazes into the grave of Moses, the son of Imran alayhi salam, yusalli, praying. And the Rasul sees him inside of his grave. And just as Moses was, the Rasul is, saved to a higher, unfathomable degree. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama,
جُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. Isn't it? The coolness of my eye has been placed in prayer. And those Imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, like an Imam of the same generation, as Sayyidina Sa'id ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah ta'ala, Sayyidina Thabit al-Bunani, rahimahullah ta'ala, هَكَذَا كَانَ يَدْعُو. That's how he used to make his dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah warzuqni as-salah fi qabri. Oh Allah, grant me prayer inside of my grave. Sayyidina Thabit al-Bunani, the supreme quote-unquote student of the Imam we've just heard, Sayyidina Anas, radiyallahu anhu warra. The greatest student of Anas ibn Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, Sayyidina Thabit al-Bunani, as al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, and Ahmed say, Thabit ala ismihi. Thabit is his name, fame, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In tansurullaha yansurkum wa yuthabbit aqdamakum. Victory to God, God will give victory to you, and he'll make you thabit. Yuthabbit aqdamakum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And so thereby, after the death of Sayyidina Thabit al-Bunani, rahimahullah ta'ala, after his death, that they accidentally knock in the grave, the lahad, Sayyidina Thabit al-Bunani, and they see him praying in his grave. That did Thabit al-Bunani praying in his grave. Hakada Allah ta'ala granted that great Imam Qabul, rahimahullah ta'ala. That's of the Rijal of Bukhari, the Sanad of Bukhari, of the Rijal of Muslim, in the Sanad of Muslim, the great Imam, Sayyidina Thabit al-Bunani, rahimahullah ta'ala. He says, Sayyidina Anas inherited Hayba from the Prophet ﷺ cave, and his name is Anas, the intimacy. You think that Sayyidina Anas, with a name called Anas, that he'd be on the beautiful side, mashallah ta'ala, of the divine. They said, La, Jalal, Sayyidina Anas, rahimahullah ta'ala. So they said in the gathering of Sayyidina Anas, people couldn't raise their voices. They couldn't ask any question. In the gathering of Sayyidina Anas, Khatam and Nabi, the servant of the Prophet ﷺ, so they'd all get together and they'd put it all on Thabit al-Bunani. They'd conspire all the students. Thabit, you're the spokesman. You ask the questions. Why? Thabit ala ismi. Thabit is his name. He's firm even in the face of majesty. The majesty of Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. This is further affirmed, rahimahullah ta'ala, and Sheikh Abdallah, he says, affirmed by the narration of Imam Muslim, rahimahullah ta'ala, in the Sahih, and in Nasa'i, on the authority of Anas ibn Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the night I was taken up, I came to Musa and I found him praying in his grave by the red sand hill, the red dune. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. The angels touch the blessed grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam for blessing and honor. They descend every single day just to touch the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, to derive barakah from the grave of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Don't worry, even if human beings are quote unquote not given access on a daily basis to touch his grave, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent beings from the heavens who every day without fail are touching the graves of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Imam Darimi also narrated that Sayyidina Ka'b al-Ahbar radiallahu anhu warra went to visit Aisha. Sayyidina Ka'b al-Ahbar, of the Imams of the Tabi'een, rabbi from the Jews who embraces Islam inside the age of Umar ibn Khatab rahimahullah ta'ala, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so Sayyidina Ka'b, he goes on to Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha wardaha, and they spoke of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Ka'b, he says to Aisha, not a day goes by save that 70,000 angels descend and gather around the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam to touch it with their wings. 70,000 each and every single day. Upon the forehead imprinted the name Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as in the hadith in the Tabarani. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam was sukut alamat al-rida. And the silence of Aisha is a sign of approval. She knows all too well because she's living in the house. Can you imagine living in a house and there's the grave? There's no curtain between you and the grave and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How the great woman lived? Radiallahu anha wardaha. She lived like that for 2 years until her father died, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu wardaha, and they were buried right next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She lived like that for a further 10 years. Her house, she's gazing upon the grave of her husband sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the grave of her father radiallahu ta'ala anhu wardah, until the death of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khatab radiallahu anhu wardah. Now when he's buried there, Aisha gives permission for him to be buried there. Aisha now puts a curtain, a veil between the graves. Look at Aisha's understanding of those who ahya fi quburihim, those who are alive in their grave. The Rasul, mahram. Abu Bakr, mahram. Umar, ghair mahram. Umar's not a mahram. So she puts a veil now between the graves and herself, radiallahu ta'ala anha wardaha. So you understand who's living in graves. Not just the Anbiya, but those who walk in the footsteps of the Anbiya themselves, the footsteps of the Prophets, yani alayhimus salam. And Aisha knows all too well. You know, one of the shuyukh, and he made mention, he's speaking to one of the last keepers. He died recently. The last keepers of the graves of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Last keepers would guard the actual grave of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's asking him, from the Imams of Shanqit of Mauritania, he's asking him, tell me the strange things that you experience inside at the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what he says are the same things as days when I approach the actual grave of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, something like electricity shocks me and I actually fall back. That's what he says. And the Shaykh then says to him, this Shaykh is somebody who says the Hafid, like Sheikh Abdallah Sirajuddin. And the Hafid memorized in excess of 100,000 ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sanad, like the author of the book, Sheikh Abdallah Sirajuddin, rahimahullah ta'ala. Listen, that was angels. It was angels, yeah. As you approach the grave of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then the angels, they like shock you, like the angels used to do with Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. When Ibrahim alayhi salam is rebuilding the Kaaba, if any brick of the Kaaba was beyond its foundation, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam would feel a shock, and then the brick would now be placed within the original foundation that was established by Adam and established by the Jibreel, the angels, prior to Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. The narration of Ibn Najjar and others has it, they touch the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. That is, they touch the noble grave with their wings for the blessing and honor of it, and send blessings upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And whenever afternoon comes, they ascend, and equal descend, and this will continue until the earth is rent asunder, whereupon he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will come out with 70,000 angels to bear him. Another narration of Darimi has this last to honor him. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. How he's resurrected? He's resurrected in green robes on the Buraq. 70,000 angels surrounded the Rasul as he emerges from his grave. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In Yawm al-Qiyamah, that transmits 70,000 from 70,000 from secondary say. So the 70,000 ascend, another 70,000 descend. And then when they ascend, another descend. How come they are? Up until what? Yawm al-Qiyamah. When the Rasul will thereby ascend from his grave with the last of the 70,000. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Some say, descended to touch the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, when he's in this shirk, that shirk, this shirk. How can you see people? Yani, likewise, we ra'aytu unas, lo ra'aytahum la hasibatuhum majanin. We also have seen people, but they're very different this time. Had you seen them, you'd also consider them crazy, mad. They understand the Rasul not. They understand the deen of Allah Ta'ala not. They understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not. Such that as the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, the sign of those people, enemies, that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, يَمْرِقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ, that they move beyond the religion. In the same way an arrow goes through its target. Said, when he was asked to describe them of the descriptions he gave them, that they would take verses that apply to the mushrikeen, the idolaters, and attribute them to Muslims. They're going to be the ones who call Muslims mushrikeen, idolaters and polytheists, and you're seeking from the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an act of idolatry. Touching the grave of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an act of idolatry. Extolling the praises of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you're exaggerating. You're like an idolater. It's as if you're worshipping him sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as if what the people of Iman, the people of faith, as if the people of the Qibla of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam worship any besides Allah Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala Ta'adamatuh. Hafiz al-Zulqani, he says, that is, they will magnify the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and extol his honor. it may be that Ka'b knew this from the previous scriptures because he's a rabbi after all. The compilation and writing of this book was completed on Monday, the 10th of Rajab, 1394. It will